house.
So these yellow things that you can see here are the cranes, each named after one of the engineer's family members.
Louise is my very dear wife.
Do we have any major breakdowns of Louise?
Yes, we have.
Yeah?
Louise has let me down a few times.
We have 28,000 pallets that are stored in here. One of our customers will make an order. The haulier then gets the information that says that Morrison's Wakefield need this load for 1800 on Wednesday. So my team will press a series of buttons, and then it will send instruction to the cranes to go to a location and to pull a crane to a drop-off point. And it will travel along the hard link through these doors into a location where a forklift will pick it up and load it onto a vehicle, which will then be collected by a haulier and dispatched through our gatehouse.
The Wakefield plant is one of the most sophisticated in the world. But of course, when Coke was still in its infancy, getting its product to the customer wasn't that easy. As the 1940s dawned, the world was at war, and America's biggest soft drink giants had already been fighting it out for decades. In support of the war effort, Pepsi changed their branding to a patriotic red, white and blue, with their logo appearing on all their bottle tops. Coke also had something up their sleeves to make sure they were still at the forefront of everyone's minds.
Coca-Cola turns around to the government and says, you can't ration us because we are a key item for the American fighting man. We can't be rationed in the same way you can't ration bullets and fuel and meat for the soldiers. This is necessary. And they won the argument. So Coca-Cola was not rationed. It was distributed all around the world to American servicemen.
But physically getting Coke to the troops was proving problematic.
Now, it's very difficult to ship Coca-Cola, fizzy drink, across the Atlantic when you've got the U-boats trying to bomb any boat crossing the Atlantic.
Future President Dwight D. Eisenhower came up with the perfect solution.
So Eisenhower says, well, come and build a bottling plant. So Coca-Cola builds a bottling plant behind the front lines in North Africa so that the American troops have a steady supply of Coca-Cola. No one thinks this is weird. They think, of course, because Coca-Cola is just as important as ammunition and fuel.
Despite protests from Pepsi and accusations of the army creating a cola monopoly, the bottling plants went ahead.
And of course, for the rest of the war, Coca-Cola is associated with the American liberation of various different countries. For Europeans who haven't had sugar for years and years because of rationing, it's very exciting, and it is indelibly linked with that idea of liberation, with cool Americans, with democracy, with freedom, and it, you know, that, if anything, is the foundation stone of the myth that Coca-Cola is America.
During the war, American servicemen consumed 10 billion bottles of Coca-Cola. Coke's support of the war effort was more than racking up sales. It was the single greatest marketing coup in the company's history. Coke became an icon that took on a life of its own. Post-war left Pepsi trailing. They had nothing to lose, so they just had to innovate. They trialed selling Pepsi in steel cans instead of glass bottles. They were also experimenting with a host of different yet catchy slogans.
Pepsi-Cola hits the spot, a big bottle and it's got.
And with the dawning of the age of television, the first Pepsi advert featuring a young James Dean's first TV appearance hit the screens.
More bounce to the ounce, more bounce to the ounce. Buy Pepsi by the carton.
As the smaller brand, Pepsi had to be much more nimble and make risky decisions to keep growing the business.
In a song, all the other one sounds like a dream.
Pepsi was the first in the late 60s to really see these baby boomers born after the Second World War, you know, and focus on youth in its advertising. That was Pepsi.
Pepsi are going hard for the youth market. They have got cool teenagers drink Pepsi, their fuddy-duddy parents drink Coca-Cola.
Pepsi were about to coin a phrase that would stay with them forever, the Pepsi generation.
Suddenly, they discovered advertising in a far sexier way than Coca-Cola.
These adverts specifically targeted the youth, tapping into a previously neglected market, and it had caught Coke off guard. Coke had to strike back hard. What they came up with was groundbreaking and memorable.
I'd like to buy the world a home and furnish it with love. Grow apple trees and honey bees and snow white turtle doves.
Hilltop is one of the most famous ads of all time. It simply involves a huge cast of young people from all over the world, often kind of in their national costumes, assembled on a hilltop in Italy, united by a bottle of Coca-Cola.
The song became a cultural phenomenon. I mean, people wanted to hear a song from a commercial. That doesn't happen very much. And they reinforced the original Coca-Cola is the real thing is what's going to bring us together.
It's the real thing. What the world wants today.
It's so saccharine. I mean, it's teach the world how to sing with honeybees and apple trees. I mean, it's awful, but it worked. It really worked. It tapped into a latent desire, particularly from Americans, that we could find world peace thanks to Coca-Cola.
By this time, the cola wars were well and truly on in advertising realms. Pepsi's market share continued to climb, and in 1975, Pepsi shook up the industry in a way no one saw coming.
Coca-Cola is the classic brand leader. It's the one that we're all taught about, how you should position yourself as the original, as the only authentic choice, and not even acknowledge any of your rivals. Pepsi's the definitive challenger brand, though. You can't beat the brand leader on its own terms. You've got to find a way around it. You've got to outflank it. You've got to try and undermine the brand leader.
So, in the 1970s, as Pepsi starts to rediscover its mojo and it goes for the youth audience, they do a big advertising campaign, which some senior executives at Pepsi were very nervous about. It was a very aggressive move to go out there on television and explicitly say, Pepsi is better than Coca-Cola.
Whilst Coca-Cola was delivering us ads which were glossy, full of glamour, Pepsi was getting real, and they took it to our streets with the Pepsi Challenge.
You're about to take the Pepsi Challenge. You know, I have 2 bottles of cola back here, and you don't know which is which.
No, I don't.
We have never met before.
That's correct.
Right, okay. Except at my sister's wedding. But beside that, we have never met.
Well, the Pepsi Challenge is fascinating. Basically, the Pepsi company decided to do taste tests in markets around the country and advertise the findings.
This is the taste. This is the test. Pepsi versus Coke, the Pepsi Challenge. And all across America, more people pick Pepsi. Time after time after time.
Pepsi-Cola.
Oh, what a time.
This campaign was so innovative, it stripped away 90 years of brand loyalty and took it back to the product.
This was actually a really bold step from Pepsi, because what it was saying is, we're setting the tone of the conversation.
Which do you prefer?
I like you.
Tell me what you picked.
I like Pepsi, now I know. I've been drinking Coke all this time. Well, Pepsi tastes pretty good.
Well, so it turns out a slight number more people like the sweeter taste of Pepsi on a first sip.
So what was it that made people choose Pepsi? Rather than clever marketing, could there be a different explanation? The human tongue can detect 4 basic flavors: salt, sour, bitter, and sweet. Humans are naturally pre-programmed to be drawn to sweet, so if Pepsi is slightly sweeter, it gets the edge.
So what we got here is a very diluted Coca-Cola. This is literally some Coca-Cola with water, and the same amount of Pepsi with the same amount of water. And this chemical here is something called DNSA, and it's a test that we use to show essentially how much sugar is in stuff. What we're going to do is add the same amount of this to both, and we're going to leave that for about 10 minutes, and then we should see a colour change. So we're starting off with this very yellowy orange colour.
The samples are placed into a water bath for 10 minutes.
So what we see when we look very, very closely is that the Pepsi, this one here, is a darker colour than the Coca-Cola. Now the difference is small, and we know that's the case because there is very little difference in the sugar content. But this would lend credit to the fact that Pepsi has more sugar, and that might well be a factor when we consider the Pepsi challenge.
So it's a brilliant piece of marketing because it takes the most important attribute in the category, which is taste, and it presents a scientific test that shows Pepsi coming out on top every single time. So that's fantastic for Pepsi.
All across this country, people took the Pepsi challenge, and Pepsi won because you know a winner when you taste one.
Even though the difference was minimal, it was enough to tip the taste scales in Pepsi's favor. Ads like this made it exciting. It was brave, it was bold, and some would say reckless. But it paid off and brought millions of new followers to Pepsi, elevating it to a whole new level.
But it was quite a risky move by Pepsi because Coke's the market leader, and you would presume by definition that more people would prefer Coke, but they didn't.
Coca-Cola would be shaken enough to question its entire product.
And it caused immense consternation back in headquarters in Atlanta because it was a direct challenge to the quality of the product.
The cola wars have been raging for the last 130 years.
The battle between Coke and Pepsi is a real heavyweight one, slugging it out, ducking and diving now for decades.
But it's been hard for Pepsi, who are considered the underdog of this double act.
One of the perennial problems that Pepsi faces is that it can be seen as a second best option. So sometimes we see it as something we don't ask for, but we're just given when there's no Coca-Cola available, and perhaps with an apology at the same time. So throughout their advertising history, Pepsi has tried to address that.
What do you have, folks? A large pepperoni pizza.
And a Pepsi, please.
In the 90s, they did that with an angelic little girl. She's given a Coke, and then she's transformed into this somewhat scary mafioso boss who makes it very clear that she really, really, really does want a Pepsi.
Hey, come here. I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm going to tell you. We both know I ordered a Pepsi-Cola, and now you've insulted me and my entire family by offering me this.
They're a little bit more of a cheeky upstart, so they like to use that to lighten the mood, whereas a lot of Coke's best advertising has been perhaps more soulful and traditional and heartwarming in its tone of voice.
It wasn't just little girls on the payroll. To capture our attention and grab sales from Coke, Pepsi drafted in some of the biggest names in pop. Like this ad featuring David Bowie and Tina Turner.
And it really takes off in the 1980s when it hires, at the most outrageous sum of money, $5 million, the services of Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson's involvement positioned Pepsi as the cola for the new generation, and a big budget ad was commissioned.
The story goes, he's shown the storyboard of the advert, and he goes, I don't like the advert. You show my face too much. It's like, what? We've spent $5 million hiring the services of Michael Jackson, and he's turning around saying he doesn't want his face involved in the advert. This is an absolute disaster. But actually, it is supposedly Michael Jackson himself who comes up with the idea that don't show my face at the start. Show the little symbols of Michael Jackson, my silvery glove, my hat, my dance moves, and only at the end do I turn around and you see my face.
You're the Pepsi generation. Girls are down and taste the thrill of the day.
Ultimately, Pepsi is associated with youth and with pop culture in a way that Coke can't quite match.
But sometimes these celebrity endorsements don't always work. And in 2017, a Pepsi ad made headlines for all the wrong reasons.
But the love wasn't done. Yeah, not on my watch.
The Kendall Jenner commercial was a rare mistake in the Pepsi advertising story. But this one went disastrously wrong because they forgot to take into account the context.
We